Imagine waking up one day and the negative voice inside your head is finally silent. No more overthinking. No more emotional exhaustion. No more fighting invisible battles inside your mind every night. Buddhism teaches that peace was never missing from your life. Your mind was simply trained to suffer, and what has been trained in darkness can also be trained back into peace. 1. Your mind believes whatever you repeat. Every single day your mind is listening to you even when you do not realize it. The thoughts you repeat quietly inside yourself slowly become the emotional atmosphere you live in. Most people think suffering only comes from painful events, difficult people, or hard circumstances, but Buddhism teaches that much of human suffering is created through unconscious repetition inside the mind. A negative thought repeated enough times stops feeling like a thought and starts feeling like reality. You may not even notice how often you speak against yourself internally. The process becomes automatic. You fail once, and suddenly the mind says, "I always ruin everything." Someone disappoints you, and your thoughts whisper, "Nobody truly cares about me." You compare your life to others, and slowly the sentence becomes, "I will never be enough." At first these thoughts seem small, but repetition gives them power. The mind begins accepting them without question. Over time they shape your emotions, your confidence, your relationships, and even the way you see the future. Buddhism explains that the mind works like fertile soil. Whatever you continuously plant into it will eventually grow. If you constantly feed fear, anger, insecurity, jealousy, and hopelessness into your inner world, those emotions begin controlling your life. Eventually, negativity no longer feels like something visiting your mind. It starts feeling like your identity. This is why some people live trapped inside cycles of overthinking for years without understanding why peace feels so far away. The dangerous part is that negative thinking often sounds believable because it is connected to emotional pain. The mind keeps replaying old wounds, embarrassing moments, heartbreaks, rejection, failure, and fear, until the past becomes louder than the present moment. Buddhism teaches that human beings suffer deeply because they attach themselves to thoughts without observing them clearly. Instead of seeing thoughts as temporary mental activity, people treat every thought as absolute truth. But your mind is not always telling you the truth. Sometimes it is only repeating old conditioning. Sometimes it is replaying survival patterns created during painful moments in your life. A person who experienced rejection may unconsciously expect rejection everywhere. A person who was constantly criticized may begin attacking themselves even when nobody else is doing it anymore. The mind memorizes emotional pain and repeats it for protection, but eventually that protection becomes suffering. Peace begins the moment you become aware of the pattern. The moment you pause and quietly observe your thoughts instead of instantly believing them, something powerful starts changing inside you. Buddhism teaches that awareness breaks unconscious suffering. When you learn to sit still and watch the mind carefully, you begin realizing that thoughts come and go like clouds in the sky. Some thoughts are fearful, some are angry, some are deeply sad, but none of them are truly permanent unless you keep feeding them attention and repetition. This is the first step toward rewiring your mind. Not forcing positivity, not pretending pain does not exist, but learning to observe your thoughts without becoming emotionally controlled by them. The moment you stop identifying with every negative sentence inside your head, the mind slowly loses its power over your peace. And for the first time in a long time, you begin understanding that your thoughts are not who you are. They are only mental habits that can be changed. 2. Negative thoughts grow in silence and isolation. Negative thoughts become dangerous when they are left alone inside the mind for too long. Buddhism teaches that the human mind has a natural tendency to hold on to suffering, especially when a person becomes emotionally isolated from awareness, peace, and human connection. What begins as one painful thought can slowly grow into an entire inner reality if it is repeated in silence every day without being questioned. Most people do not even realize this process is happening. They sit quietly with their fears every night, replaying painful memories, imagining worst-case scenarios, comparing themselves to others, and slowly convincing themselves that the darkness inside their head is the truth. The mind keeps repeating the same emotional stories until suffering starts feeling normal. Over time, loneliness turns into overthinking, overthinking turns into anxiety, and anxiety slowly becomes part of a person's identity. This is why many people feel mentally exhausted, even when nothing terrible is happening around them. Their suffering is no longer coming from reality itself. It is coming from the non-stop mental noise they carry inside them. Buddhism teaches that an undisciplined mind creates unnecessary suffering because it constantly feeds itself fear, attachment, regret, insecurity, and imagined problems. The longer negative thinking stays hidden inside silence, the stronger it becomes. You may notice this late at night when the world becomes quiet. Suddenly the mind becomes louder than ever. Old conversations return, regrets replay themselves repeatedly, embarrassing memories feel fresh again. Fear about the future begins creating imaginary pain before anything has even happened. One thought leads to another, until the mind becomes trapped inside endless mental loops. And because nobody else can hear these thoughts, people often suffer silently for years while pretending they are fine on the outside. Buddhism teaches that thoughts become powerful when they remain unconscious. A negative thought loses much of its power the moment it is observed clearly, but most people never pause long enough to observe their thinking. They immediately react emotionally to every thought entering their mind. If the thought says, "You are failing," they believe it. If the thought says, "Nobody truly cares about you," they emotionally collapse into it. The mind speaks, and the person instantly obeys. But Buddhist wisdom teaches something completely different. You are not supposed to fight every thought. You are supposed to observe it calmly without attachment. A monk sitting in meditation does not panic because a fearful thought appears. He does not become angry because the mind becomes noisy. He simply watches the thought arrive and watches it disappear. This awareness creates distance between the person and the mental suffering. Imagine standing beside a river watching leaves float past in the water. You do not jump into the river to grab every leaf. You simply observe them passing by. Buddhism teaches that thoughts should be treated the same way. Some thoughts are peaceful, some are painful, some are fearful, but none of them deserve complete control over your inner state. The problem begins when you grab every negative thought emotionally and allow it to define your reality. Isolation also strengthens negativity because the mind begins feeding itself without interruption. When a person spends too much time trapped inside mental suffering without moments of peace, mindfulness, or healthy emotional connection, the brain slowly normalizes negativity. This is why environments matter deeply. Constant negativity online, toxic relationships, endless comparison, and emotional loneliness all strengthen destructive thinking patterns. The mind absorbs whatever atmosphere it spends time inside. Buddhism encourages silence, but not the kind of silence where suffering grows unnoticed. It encourages mindful silence, a peaceful silence where you become aware of your breathing, your emotions, your thoughts, and the present moment itself. There is a massive difference between lonely overthinking and conscious stillness. One destroys the mind while the other heals it. When you sit quietly with awareness, something beautiful starts happening inside you. You begin noticing how temporary thoughts truly are. You realize that emotions rise and fall naturally when you stop feeding them resistance and fear. You begin understanding that peace was never completely gone. It was simply buried under mental noise. Many people spend years believing they are broken because their thoughts feel dark, heavy, or exhausting. But Buddhism teaches that the mind is trainable. A noisy mind can become calm. A fearful mind can become peaceful. An anxious mind can become still. But transformation begins the moment you stop blindly believing every thought your mind produces. Your healing starts when you become the observer instead of the victim of your thinking. The moment you learn to sit with your thoughts without immediately drowning inside them, negative thinking begins losing its grip on your life. Slowly, the silence that once felt suffocating becomes peaceful again, And for the first time you realize that peace was never created by controlling every thought. It was created by learning not to attach yourself to them. 3. Your environment programs your mind. Most people believe their thoughts are completely personal, as if the mind creates itself independently from the world around it. But Buddhism teaches that the human mind is deeply shaped by its environment, the energy you live around, the people you spend time with, the conversations you constantly hear, the content you consume every day, and even the emotional atmosphere surrounding your life slowly begin programming your inner world without you realizing it. This is why some people feel emotionally drained all the time, even when they cannot explain why. Their mind is constantly absorbing negativity from their environment. Every day they wake up and immediately consume noise, comparison, fear, gossip, anger, and emotional chaos. Then later they wonder why peace feels impossible to maintain. The mind becomes what it repeatedly touches. If you surround yourself with constant negativity, eventually negativity starts feeling normal. A person who spends all day around complaining people slowly becomes more negative themselves. A person constantly exposed to drama begins expecting conflict everywhere. A person addicted to comparison slowly loses gratitude for their own life. The environment quietly shapes emotional habits until they become automatic patterns inside the mind. Buddhism explains that suffering often grows through unconscious exposure. Many people poison their inner peace every day without realizing it. They consume endless stressful content online. They constantly compare their appearance, success, relationships, and lifestyle to strangers. They spend hours listening to fear, anger, arguments, and emotional chaos. Then at night, they sit alone wondering why their mind feels restless and heavy. The human mind was never designed to absorb endless stimulation without consequences. Your nervous system remembers everything. Every image, every emotional experience, every toxic interaction leaves an imprint on the mind. Over time, the brain begins adapting itself to the emotional atmosphere you repeatedly live inside. This is why Buddhism places such deep importance on mindful living. Ancient Buddhist teachings understood something powerful long before modern psychology explained it. Your surroundings influence your consciousness. If your daily environment is full of noise, distraction, emotional tension, and mental pollution, inner peace becomes difficult because the mind never fully relaxes. Look carefully at your life for a moment. What do you feed your mind every day? What kind of conversations surround you? What kind of people influence your emotions? What type of content controls your attention? Because whatever enters your mind repeatedly eventually shapes your emotional state. Some people spend years around individuals who constantly criticize them, manipulate them, or drain their energy emotionally. Slowly their confidence disappears, their mind becomes filled with insecurity and fear, not because they were born broken, but because the environment trained them to see themselves through pain. Buddhism teaches that the people around you can either strengthen your peace or strengthen your suffering. This does not mean you must hate people or isolate yourself from the world. Buddhism is not teaching emotional coldness, it is teaching awareness. You must become conscious of what energies are entering your inner world daily. Peaceful minds are not created accidentally. They are protected intentionally. Even your physical environment affects your mental state. A chaotic space often creates a chaotic mind. Constant noise keeps the nervous system overstimulated. Endless distraction weakens awareness. This is why Buddhist monks value simplicity so deeply. Calm spaces help create calm minds. Silence allows awareness to grow. Nature reconnects the mind with stillness. Simplicity reduces mental pressure. Modern life trains people to constantly seek stimulation because silence feels uncomfortable. The moment boredom appears, people immediately grab their phones, scroll endlessly, consume more information, and overload the mind again. But Buddhism teaches that endless stimulation weakens inner peace because the mind never learns how to rest inside the present moment. Your environment also affects the identity you develop. If you constantly surround yourself with people who normalize negativity, self-destruction, laziness, emotional chaos, or hopelessness, eventually your mind begins accepting those patterns as natural. But when you spend time around peaceful people, disciplined people, emotionally aware people, and environments filled with calm energy, your mind slowly starts adapting to peace instead. The mind is constantly learning from repetition. This is why healing often feels impossible when someone remains trapped inside the same toxic environment that created their suffering in the first place. A person cannot constantly feed their mind negativity and expect inner peace to grow naturally. Peace requires protection. Buddhism teaches that awareness means becoming selective about what you allow into your consciousness. Not every conversation deserves your energy. Not every environment deserves your presence. Not every piece of content deserves your attention. Every day you are either feeding peace or feeding suffering. This becomes especially dangerous in the modern world because negativity spreads quickly online. Fear gains attention. Anger becomes entertainment. Comparison becomes addiction. People constantly see edited versions of other lives and slowly begin feeling inadequate about their own existence. The mind becomes overstimulated with unrealistic expectations, emotional pressure, and endless distraction. Then anxiety, insecurity, and exhaustion begin growing silently inside. A peaceful mind cannot survive constant emotional pollution. Eventually, something inside begins breaking. You feel restless for no reason. You lose emotional clarity. Small problems feel overwhelming. Your thoughts become heavier. Your patience disappears. Even when life is relatively calm, your nervous system remains trapped in survival mode because the environment trained your mind to stay emotionally overstimulated. This is why protecting your peace is not selfish, it is necessary. Buddhism teaches that inner peace is something sacred. You must consciously create conditions that allow the mind to heal. Spend more time in silence. Spend more time in nature. Spend more time away from endless comparison and noise. Create moments where your nervous system can finally breathe again. Healing often begins with small environmental changes. Waking up without immediately consuming negativity, reducing time around emotionally draining people, cleaning your space, spending quiet moments alone without distraction, practicing mindfulness instead of constant stimulation. Slowly, the mind begins calming itself naturally, and something beautiful happens when your environment changes. Your thoughts begin changing too. The mind becomes lighter. You stop feeling emotionally attacked by every small problem. You react less impulsively. Your breathing slows down. You begin experiencing moments of stillness that once felt impossible. Many people are trying to heal their mind while remaining addicted to environments that constantly recreate their suffering. Buddhism teaches that transformation requires awareness of both the inner world and the outer world. Your thoughts matter, but so does the environment feeding those thoughts every single day. A peaceful life is not built only by controlling the mind, it is also built by creating an atmosphere where peace can survive. Because eventually your environment becomes your mental climate, and whatever climate you repeatedly live inside, your mind slowly becomes. 4. Peace begins when you stop attacking yourself. One of the deepest forms of suffering is not caused by the world. It is caused by the way you secretly speak to yourself every single day. Many people look calm on the outside while living in constant war inside their own mind. They smile around others, continue their routines, go to work, respond to messages, and pretend everything is fine, but internally they are exhausted from years of self-judgment, self-hatred, guilt, regret, and emotional punishment. Buddhism teaches that human beings often become their own greatest source of suffering because they attack themselves mentally without even realizing it. Some people learned this habit very early in life. They grew up constantly criticized, compared, rejected, ignored, or emotionally hurt. Slowly the voice of pain became their inner voice. Over time, they no longer needed other people to insult them, because the mind continued the attack automatically. Every mistake became proof they were not enough. Every failure became confirmation that they were weak. Every rejection became evidence that they were unlovable, and eventually self-criticism stopped feeling harmful. It started feeling normal. This is how suffering quietly becomes identity. Buddhism teaches that the mind becomes shaped by repeated mental habits. If your inner world is filled with constant judgment and emotional violence toward yourself, peace cannot grow there. A person cannot heal while speaking to themselves with cruelty every single day. Yet many people do exactly this without noticing how deeply it affects their emotional state. Think about how often you attack yourself internally. You replay embarrassing moments from years ago. You obsess over mistakes long after everyone else forgot them. You compare yourself to people who seem happier, more successful, more attractive, or more confident. You blame yourself for things outside your control. You punish yourself for not healing fast enough. You carry guilt like a permanent identity instead of a temporary emotion. The mind becomes heavy because it never feels safe. Buddhism teaches that compassion is not only meant for others. True compassion must also include yourself. But many people struggle with this because they believe self-kindness is weakness. They think constantly criticizing themselves will somehow make them stronger, more disciplined, or more successful. In reality, endless self-hatred only creates deeper emotional suffering. A mind constantly attacked by its own owner eventually becomes exhausted. This is why some people feel emotionally tired all the time, even when they are resting physically. Their body may be sitting still, but mentally they are fighting themselves every hour of the day. The nervous system remains trapped in tension because the mind never stops creating pressure, shame, fear, and emotional punishment. Buddhism explains that much of human suffering comes from attachment to identity. People become attached to painful stories about themselves. I am a failure. I always ruin things. I am broken. Nobody could truly love me. These thoughts become repeated so often that the person no longer questions them. The mind accepts them as permanent truth. But these are not truths. They are conditioned mental patterns created through pain and repetition. A person who was abandoned may unconsciously believe they are unworthy of love. A person constantly criticized may believe perfection is required to deserve acceptance. A person betrayed emotionally may begin expecting disappointment from everyone. The mind adapts itself to painful experiences for survival. But eventually those survival patterns continue creating suffering long after the original pain is gone. Buddhism teaches that awareness breaks this cycle. The moment you begin observing how harshly you treat yourself internally, something important changes. You begin realizing that many of your thoughts are not objective reality. They are emotional wounds speaking through the mind. And wounds cannot heal if they are constantly reopened through self-attack. This does not mean avoiding responsibility for mistakes. Buddhism is not teaching denial, it is teaching balance. You can acknowledge your flaws without destroying yourself emotionally. You can learn from mistakes without turning them into lifelong self-hatred. You can grow without becoming your own enemy. Many people think peace comes from controlling the outside world. They believe they will finally feel calm once life becomes perfect. Once they become more successful, more attractive, more loved, or more accomplished, then peace will arrive. But Buddhism teaches that peace begins internally. A person can have everything externally and still suffer deeply if their inner voice remains cruel. There are people surrounded by love who still feel worthless because their mind attacks them constantly. There are successful people who still feel empty because nothing they achieve silences their self-hatred. There are beautiful people who still feel ugly because the mind became addicted to criticism. External improvement cannot heal an inner world built on emotional violence. Your relationship with yourself shapes the quality of your entire life. If your mind is always judging you, peace becomes impossible because there is nowhere inside yourself where you can truly rest. Even moments of success become temporary because the mind quickly searches for another flaw, another mistake, another reason to feel inadequate again. Buddhism teaches that awareness allows you to step outside this endless cycle. The moment you stop automatically believing every self-destructive thought, you create space for healing. You begin noticing how often the mind exaggerates pain, magnifies failure, and ignores progress. You realize the inner critic is not wisdom, it is conditioning, and conditioning can change. Imagine speaking to yourself the same way you speak to someone you deeply love. Imagine responding to your own pain with patience instead of punishment. Imagine making mistakes without mentally destroying yourself afterward. Imagine allowing yourself to be human without carrying endless shame for it. For many people, this feels unfamiliar because they were taught that harshness creates improvement. But Buddhism teaches that peace grows through awareness and compassion, not emotional abuse. A calm mind learns better than a fearful mind. Healing becomes possible when the nervous system no longer feels constantly attacked. This is why mindfulness matters so deeply. The more aware you become of your inner dialogue, the more power you gain to change it. Most self-hatred survives unconsciously. It repeats automatically in the background of daily life. But once awareness enters the process, the cycle weakens. You start catching the thoughts. You notice when the mind begins attacking you unfairly. You pause before emotionally collapsing into negativity. Slowly, the relationship with yourself begins changing. At first it feels unnatural. A person who spent years criticizing themselves may struggle to show themselves compassion. The mind may resist it. Part of you may even believe you do not deserve kindness. But Buddhism teaches that every human being carries suffering, confusion, fear, and imperfection. This is part of being alive. You are not uniquely broken because you struggle. You are human, and healing begins the moment you stop treating yourself like an enemy. Forgiveness also becomes an important part of peace. Many people remain emotionally trapped because they refuse to let go of old mistakes. They replay the past endlessly, wishing they had acted differently, spoken differently, chosen differently. The mind becomes imprisoned by regret, but Buddhism teaches that attachment to the past creates suffering because the past cannot be changed. You can learn from it, but you cannot live there forever. The version of you who made those mistakes existed with a different level of awareness, pain, fear, and understanding. Constantly punishing yourself for your past only creates more suffering in the present moment. Real healing requires letting yourself evolve. The person you are today does not need to remain trapped inside old identities forever. Minds change, habits change, awareness changes, emotional wounds can heal, but healing becomes impossible when every day begins with self-attack and ends with self-condemnation. A peaceful mind is not a perfect mind. It is a mind that no longer destroys itself constantly. There will still be difficult days. There will still be moments of insecurity, sadness, fear, and emotional struggle. Buddhism does not promise a life without pain. It teaches freedom from unnecessary suffering created by attachment and unconscious thinking. The way you speak to yourself matters deeply because eventually your inner voice becomes the emotional environment you live inside every day. If that environment is filled with hatred, shame, and judgment, your spirit slowly becomes exhausted. But if awareness, patience, forgiveness, and compassion begin entering your inner world, something starts softening inside you. You breathe easier. You stop carrying so much emotional weight. You stop expecting perfection from yourself constantly. And slowly, peace begins appearing in places where suffering once lived. Not because life suddenly became easy, but because you finally stopped turning your own mind against yourself. 5. The present moment destroys overthinking. Most human suffering does not happen in the present moment. It happens inside the mind. A person may be sitting safely in their room while mentally reliving old pain from years ago. Another person may be lying in bed imagining terrible futures that have not even happened yet. The body exists in the present, but the mind constantly travels between regret and fear. Buddhism teaches that this unconscious movement of the mind is one of the greatest causes of emotional suffering. Overthinking is what happens when the mind loses connection with the present moment. The mind becomes addicted to analyzing, replaying, predicting, worrying, imagining, and mentally controlling everything. At first it may feel harmless. A person believes they are simply thinking deeply or trying to solve problems. But slowly the thinking becomes compulsive. The mind never truly rests anymore. Even peaceful moments become interrupted by endless mental noise. This is why some people feel exhausted all the time, even when life seems relatively stable. Their nervous system is constantly overwhelmed because the mind never stops creating emotional tension. The body remains trapped in stress because the brain keeps reacting to imagined problems, future fears, old memories, and internal pressure, as if danger is happening right now. Buddhism teaches something deeply powerful. The present moment is the only place where peace actually exists. But most people rarely stay there long enough to experience it. The mind constantly escapes into the past or future because the ego believes control can be found there. It replays old conversations trying to change what already happened. It imagines future scenarios trying to prevent pain before it arrives. But no matter how much the mind thinks, worries, or analyzes, it cannot control life completely. And this endless attempt to mentally control everything becomes suffering itself. Think about how much time the human mind spends replaying the same painful memories. A person remembers embarrassment from years ago as if it happened yesterday. They replay heartbreak repeatedly. They obsess over mistakes endlessly. They imagine what they should have said differently, what they should have done differently, how life could have turned out differently. The past becomes a prison because the mind refuses to let it go. At the same time, the future creates another form of suffering. People constantly fear things that may never happen. What if I fail? What if they leave me? What if my future becomes terrible? What if something goes wrong? The mind creates imaginary pain long before reality even arrives. Buddhism explains that overthinking survives through attachment. The mind becomes attached to certainty, control, and emotional security. It wants guarantees about life. It wants permanent safety. It wants reassurance that nothing painful will happen again. But life itself is uncertain. The more the mind fights uncertainty, the more anxiety grows. This is why the present moment becomes so powerful. When awareness fully returns to now, overthinking weakens immediately, because in the present moment, most imagined suffering disappears. Right now, in this exact second, you are simply breathing. The floor beneath you exists, the sounds around you exist, this moment exists, but overthinking pulls you away from reality and traps you inside mental illusions. The mind creates storms that are not actually happening now. Buddhism teaches mindfulness because mindfulness reconnects consciousness to reality instead of imagination. A mindful person learns to observe life directly instead of constantly living inside mental projections. They become aware of breathing, sensations, sounds, emotions, and thoughts, without becoming trapped inside endless analysis. Many people misunderstand mindfulness. They think it means forcing the mind to become empty or peaceful instantly. But Buddhism does not teach force. It teaches awareness. Thoughts will continue appearing, emotions will continue rising and falling. But mindfulness changes your relationship with them. Instead of drowning inside thoughts, you begin observing them. Instead of reacting to every fear immediately, you notice it calmly. Instead of mentally chasing every problem, you return your awareness to the present moment again and again. This simple practice slowly transforms the nervous system. Imagine sitting quietly and focusing only on your breathing for 1 minute. At first, the mind becomes restless. Thoughts appear constantly. Memories interrupt you. Worries pull your attention away. But Buddhism teaches that the practice is not about stopping thoughts perfectly. The practice is gently returning awareness to the present every time the mind wanders. Little by little, the mind learns stillness again. This is important because modern life trains the brain to become addicted to overstimulation. People constantly consume information, notifications, entertainment, drama, and endless distractions. Silence feels uncomfortable because the mind has forgotten how to simply exist peacefully in the present moment. As a result, overthinking becomes stronger. The nervous system remains overstimulated every day. The mind jumps constantly between thoughts without rest. People scroll endlessly searching for distraction while secretly becoming more mentally exhausted. Buddhism teaches that endless stimulation weakens awareness because the mind never learns to settle into stillness. This is why peaceful moments often feel unfamiliar to people trapped in overthinking. The moment silence appears, the mind quickly fills it with worries, analysis, fear, and emotional noise again. Many people are physically resting while mentally fighting themselves every hour of the day. But something incredible happens when you begin practicing presence consistently. You slowly realize that most thoughts are temporary. Fear comes and goes. Sadness comes and goes. Anxiety rises and falls. Even painful emotions eventually change when you stop feeding them constant mental attention. The present moment creates distance between you and your thoughts. Suddenly, the mind no longer feels like absolute truth. You begin understanding that thoughts are simply mental events passing through awareness. Some are useful, some are fearful, some are irrational, some are emotional echoes from the past. But they do not all deserve your complete belief and emotional attachment. Buddhism often compares thoughts to clouds moving through the sky. The sky itself remains untouched, even while clouds pass through it. In the same way, awareness itself remains calm beneath temporary mental storms. But most people become so attached to thoughts that they forget the deeper stillness already existing beneath the noise. Overthinking also damages peace, because it disconnects people from life itself. A person may spend an entire conversation trapped inside anxiety instead of truly listening. They may walk through beautiful nature while mentally replaying stress. They may sit beside loved ones while emotionally trapped inside future fears. The mind becomes so busy analyzing life that it stops experiencing life directly. This creates emptiness. People feel disconnected from joy because their attention never fully enters the moment they are living. Buddhism teaches that life can only truly be experienced now. Peace can only be felt now. Healing can only happen now. But overthinking constantly pulls awareness somewhere else. This is why mindfulness becomes a path back to aliveness. When you fully drink a cup of tea with awareness, life feels calmer. When you walk slowly and consciously breathe fresh air, the nervous system softens. When you listen fully to another person without mental distraction, connection deepens. When you sit quietly, without chasing thoughts, inner stillness begins appearing naturally. The present moment heals because it interrupts the mind's addiction to psychological time. Most suffering exists in mental time. The past creates regret. The future creates fear. But now creates peace. This does not mean ignoring responsibilities or pretending problems do not exist. Buddhism does not teach avoidance. It teaches balance. You can plan for the future without emotionally living inside fear constantly. You can learn from the past without remaining imprisoned by it. The goal is not to stop thinking completely. The goal is to stop becoming controlled by compulsive thinking. There is a huge difference. A peaceful mind still thinks when necessary, but it no longer lives trapped inside endless mental noise every moment of the day. Thoughts become tools instead of prisons. Over time, mindfulness changes the brain itself. The nervous system becomes calmer. Emotional reactions become less intense. Patience grows naturally. Small problems no longer feel overwhelming because awareness creates space between the event and the reaction. This is why monks appear peaceful, even during difficulty. It is not because they never experience pain. It is because they trained the mind to remain connected to the present, instead of becoming consumed by fear and attachment. Most people are trying to solve overthinking by thinking even more. But Buddhism teaches the opposite. Peace is found by returning awareness to the present moment again and again until the mind remembers how to rest. At first, this feels difficult because the mind has spent years running endlessly, but every moment of awareness weakens unconscious suffering slightly. Every mindful breath reconnects you to reality. Every moment spent fully present slowly retrains the brain away from compulsive overthinking. Eventually, something beautiful begins happening inside you. Your thoughts slow down. Silence stops feeling terrifying. You no longer react emotionally to every fear immediately. Your breathing becomes calmer. Your nervous system feels lighter. And for the first time in a long time, you experience moments where the mind is not attacking you constantly. Just stillness, just presence, just peace. Not because life became perfect, but because you finally stopped abandoning the present moment to live inside endless mental noise. 6. Detach from thoughts that do not serve you. One of the greatest misunderstandings people have about the mind is believing that every thought deserves attention. Buddhism teaches that this is one of the main reasons human beings suffer emotionally. The average person becomes attached to every fear, every insecurity, every painful memory, and every negative idea that appears inside the mind. Instead of observing thoughts calmly, they immediately identify with them. The thought appears, and instantly the person believes it, reacts to it, and emotionally becomes consumed by it. But not every thought deserves your energy. Not every thought deserves your belief. And not every thought reflects reality. This realization changes everything. Many people spend years trapped inside emotional suffering because they never learned how to separate themselves from the activity of the mind. They assume that because a thought appeared, it must be important. Because a fear feels strong, it must be true. Because the mind keeps repeating something painful, it must define them. But Buddhism teaches that thoughts are temporary mental events, not permanent truths. The mind constantly produces thoughts automatically. Some are useful, some are meaningless, some are rooted in fear, some are echoes of past pain, some are simply habits created through repetition and emotional conditioning. Yet most people treat every thought as if it carries absolute authority. Imagine sitting quietly when suddenly the mind says, "You are not good enough." Immediately your emotions begin changing. Your body becomes heavy, your confidence drops, your mood shifts. One thought completely alters your inner state because you attached yourself to it without questioning it. Then another thought appears. What if you fail? What if nobody truly loves you? What if your future never changes? And slowly the mind pulls you deeper into suffering. Buddhism teaches that attachment is the root of suffering. Most people think attachment only refers to relationships, possessions, or worldly desires, but attachment also exists mentally. People become attached to painful identities, fearful stories, negative thinking patterns, and destructive emotional habits. They cling to suffering because the mind has repeated it for so long that it starts feeling familiar. Familiar suffering becomes psychologically comfortable even when it hurts. This is why many people unconsciously return to negative thinking over and over again. The mind becomes addicted to emotional patterns it already knows. Fear becomes familiar, self-doubt becomes familiar, overthinking becomes familiar, emotional pain becomes familiar. Even when peace is available, the mind keeps returning to old suffering because attachment keeps the cycle alive. But Buddhism teaches that freedom begins when you stop emotionally clinging to every thought entering your consciousness. This does not mean suppressing thoughts or pretending negativity does not exist. Suppression only creates more inner conflict. Buddhism teaches observation, not resistance. The goal is not to violently fight the mind. The goal is to stop feeding destructive thoughts with constant emotional attachment. There is a huge difference. Imagine standing beside a busy road watching cars pass by. You do not chase every car. You do not jump in front of every vehicle emotionally. You simply observe them moving past. Thoughts can be treated the same way. Some thoughts are peaceful. Some are anxious. Some are irrational. Some are painful. But you do not need to follow every single one. Most suffering comes from mentally chasing thoughts that never deserved your attention in the first place. A fearful thought appears, and the mind begins building entire imaginary futures around it. One small insecurity enters awareness, and suddenly hours of overthinking follow. A painful memory returns briefly, and the person spends the rest of the night emotionally drowning inside the past again. Buddhism teaches that awareness creates freedom, because awareness allows you to notice thoughts without automatically becoming controlled by them. This is where detachment becomes powerful. Detachment does not mean becoming emotionally numb or cold. Many people misunderstand this deeply. Buddhist detachment is not the absence of emotion. It is freedom from unconscious attachment. It means thoughts no longer completely control your peace. Emotions no longer dominate your entire identity. Fear no longer owns your mind automatically. You begin understanding that thoughts can exist without needing to control you. This changes your entire relationship with suffering. Imagine how many painful thoughts you have believed throughout your life that later proved false. There were moments when your mind convinced you things would never improve, moments when fear predicted disaster, moments when insecurity told you nobody cared, moments when sadness whispered that healing was impossible. But thoughts are not prophets. The mind often speaks from fear, conditioning, emotional wounds, and survival instincts. A person who experienced rejection may constantly expect abandonment even when people genuinely care about them. A person hurt in the past may fear trusting anyone again. A person who failed before may unconsciously expect failure everywhere. The mind repeats old emotional patterns because repetition creates familiarity, but familiarity is not truth. Buddhism teaches that the mind creates suffering when thoughts are believed unconsciously. The moment awareness enters the process, something powerful happens. You begin questioning the thoughts instead of automatically obeying them. You pause, you observe, you stop reacting instantly, and suddenly the mind loses some of its power over you. This is why meditation is so important in Buddhism. Meditation trains awareness. It teaches you how to sit quietly with thoughts without becoming emotionally trapped inside every mental movement. At first, this feels difficult because most people have spent years reacting automatically to every thought appearing in consciousness. When they feel fear, they panic. When they feel sadness, they collapse into hopelessness. When insecurity appears, they believe it completely. But meditation slowly changes this relationship. You sit quietly. Thoughts arise naturally. Some thoughts are dark, some are anxious, some are repetitive, but instead of chasing them, you simply observe them passing through awareness. Little by little, the mind becomes less reactive. You realize something important. Thoughts only become powerful when continuously fed attention. This is why certain fears grow stronger the more you obsess over them. Attention feeds mental energy. Whatever you repeatedly focus on emotionally becomes stronger inside the mind. Buddhism teaches that suffering survives through unconscious feeding. The more energy given to fear, resentment, insecurity, jealousy, regret, and anger, the deeper those emotional patterns become rooted. But when awareness stops feeding destructive thinking constantly, those patterns slowly weaken. This does not happen instantly. The mind has been conditioned for years. Some people have spent entire lifetimes mentally attacking themselves, expecting disaster, overthinking every situation, and emotionally clinging to fear. Naturally, the brain continues repeating those habits automatically for a while. Buddhism teaches patience because transformation happens gradually through consistent awareness. Every time you notice a destructive thought without attaching yourself to it, healing begins. Every time you choose not to emotionally drown inside fear, inner freedom grows. Every time you let a painful thought pass without obsessing over it for hours, the mind becomes lighter. Detachment also creates emotional stability because you stop allowing every mental fluctuation to define your entire state. Most people live emotionally unstable lives because their peace depends completely on the activity of the mind. If thoughts become negative, their entire mood collapses. If fear appears, peace disappears immediately. Their emotional state changes constantly because they remain attached to every mental movement. But Buddhism teaches that beneath the mind exists awareness itself. Awareness is naturally calm. Thoughts move through it like waves moving across the surface of the ocean. The surface may become stormy, but the deeper water remains still. In the same way, beneath temporary thoughts and emotions, a deeper stillness already exists within you. Detachment helps you reconnect with that stillness. You stop treating every thought like an emergency. You stop reacting impulsively to every fear. You stop identifying completely with mental suffering. And slowly the nervous system begins calming down. Many people secretly fear detachment because they think letting go of thoughts means losing control. In reality, attachment is what destroys control. A person completely attached to every thought becomes emotionally controlled by the mind constantly. Fear controls them, anxiety controls them, anger controls them, insecurity controls them. Detachment creates freedom because it allows awareness to choose where attention goes consciously. This is why inner peace feels impossible for people addicted to mental attachment. Their mind never rests because every thought becomes emotionally important. The brain remains overstimulated constantly. The nervous system never fully relaxes. Even small problems create huge emotional reactions because attachment magnifies suffering. Buddhism teaches that peace becomes possible when you stop mentally clinging to everything. Not every opinion matters. Not every memory deserves endless replaying. Not every fear deserves your emotional surrender. Not every thought deserves belief. The moment you truly understand this, the mind begins changing. You breathe differently. You think more clearly. Silence becomes less frightening. Overthinking weakens. Emotional reactions soften. The mind slowly stops feeling like a battlefield. This does not mean life becomes perfect. Painful thoughts will still appear sometimes. Fear may still arise occasionally. Sadness may still visit you during difficult moments. Buddhism never promises the complete disappearance of human emotion. It teaches freedom from unnecessary suffering created by unconscious attachment. There is a profound difference. A detached mind still experiences life deeply, but it no longer becomes imprisoned by every emotional wave passing through consciousness. Thoughts come and go naturally without controlling the entire inner world constantly. This is where real peace begins, not by forcing the mind to become perfectly positive, not by escaping emotions completely, but by learning to let thoughts exist without surrendering your peace to them every single time they appear. Eventually, something beautiful begins happening inside you. The mind becomes quieter. Fear loses intensity. Negative thoughts stop controlling your entire identity. You begin feeling space inside your awareness again. And for the first time in a long time, you realize that inner peace was never about controlling every thought perfectly. It was about learning not to attach yourself to the ones destroying you. 7. A peaceful mind is built daily. Many people want peace immediately. They want one motivational video, one breakthrough moment, one meditation session, or one life change to suddenly erase years of mental exhaustion, emotional pain, anxiety, overthinking, and inner chaos. But Buddhism teaches something much deeper and far more honest. A peaceful mind is not created instantly. It is built slowly through daily habits, daily awareness, daily discipline, and daily choices repeated over time. The same way suffering was trained into the mind through repetition, peace must also be trained through repetition. This is why temporary motivation rarely changes people permanently. A person may feel inspired for one night, promise themselves they will stop overthinking, stop reacting emotionally, stop feeding negativity, and finally become peaceful. But after a few difficult days, the old mental habits return again because the mind naturally falls back into patterns it has practiced repeatedly for years. Buddhism teaches that the mind follows conditioning. Whatever you repeatedly practice becomes stronger. If you practice anger daily, anger becomes automatic. If you practice fear daily, fear becomes natural. If you practice overthinking daily, the mind eventually becomes addicted to mental noise. But the opposite is also true. If you practice awareness daily, awareness grows stronger. If you practice stillness daily, the nervous system slowly learns calmness. If you practice detachment daily, emotional freedom slowly increases. Peace is not an accident. It is a trained state of being. This is why Buddhist monks dedicate themselves to daily practice. Instead of waiting for emotional perfection to appear magically, they understand that the mind changes gradually through consistency. One moment of mindfulness may seem small, but repeated every day, it slowly transforms consciousness itself. Many people fail emotionally because they only seek peace when life becomes painful. They ignore the mind during easy periods, then panic when suffering suddenly overwhelms them. But Buddhism teaches that inner peace must be maintained continuously, just like physical health. A person cannot destroy their body every day and suddenly expect health overnight. In the same way, a person cannot feed the mind constant negativity, comparison, fear, overstimulation, and emotional chaos every day while expecting peace to appear automatically. The mind becomes what it repeatedly practices. This truth is both dangerous and beautiful. Dangerous because unconscious habits slowly shape your emotional life without permission. Beautiful because it means transformation is always possible. No matter how chaotic your mind feels today, it can change through consistent practice. Many people secretly believe they are permanently broken because they have struggled mentally for so long. They think peace belongs only to naturally calm people. But Buddhism teaches that peace is not a personality trait, it is a discipline. Some of the calmest minds were once filled with fear, confusion, anger, and suffering. What changed them was not luck. It was practice. Daily practice slowly rewires the nervous system. At first the changes feel small. You begin catching negative thoughts slightly earlier. You react less impulsively during stressful moments. You become more aware of your emotional patterns. Moments of silence become less uncomfortable. Your breathing slows down more naturally. Little by little, the inner world starts changing. This is important because modern life trains people in the opposite direction. Most people wake up and immediately flood the mind with stimulation. Notifications, social media, news, comparison, noise, stress, pressure, endless information. The nervous system barely gets a moment to rest. The brain becomes overloaded every single day. Then at night, people wonder why they feel emotionally exhausted, anxious, disconnected, or unable to stop overthinking. But Buddhism teaches that peace requires intentional living. You must consciously train the mind away from chaos. This begins with small daily habits. A few moments of silence in the morning, mindful breathing during stressful moments, walking slowly without constant distraction, observing thoughts instead of reacting immediately, choosing peaceful environments whenever possible, reducing unnecessary mental noise. These practices seem simple, but simplicity is what heals the mind. The ego often wants dramatic transformation because dramatic things feel emotionally exciting. But real peace grows quietly. It develops slowly beneath daily awareness and consistent effort. A tree does not grow overnight. In the same way, a peaceful mind develops gradually through repeated nourishment. This is why patience becomes essential. Many people quit healing because they expect immediate perfection. They become frustrated when negative thoughts still appear. They become discouraged when anxiety returns during difficult days. They believe one emotional setback means failure. But Buddhism teaches that healing is not linear. Some days the mind feels calm. Other days old patterns return strongly. This does not mean you failed. It simply means the mind is still learning. Every moment of awareness matters. Every time you pause before reacting, growth happens. Every time you choose mindfulness instead of unconscious overthinking, the brain changes slightly. Every time you let a painful thought pass without emotionally attaching to it, inner freedom grows. Progress often feels invisible in the beginning, because the changes happen internally before they fully appear externally. A person practicing mindfulness daily may still struggle sometimes, but slowly their emotional reactions become less extreme. Situations that once ruined their entire day lose power. Anxiety weakens gradually. Negative thinking becomes easier to observe instead of instantly believing. The mind softens little by little. This is how peace is built, not through one perfect moment, but through thousands of small conscious moments repeated consistently. Buddhism also teaches that discipline creates freedom. Many people think discipline feels restrictive, but undisciplined minds often suffer the most. A mind left completely uncontrolled becomes trapped in compulsive thinking, emotional impulses, addictions, overstimulation, and unconscious habits. Discipline protects peace because it creates structure around awareness. For example, choosing not to constantly consume negativity online is discipline. Taking time to meditate daily is discipline. Stepping away from toxic environments is discipline. Choosing silence instead of endless distraction is discipline. And over time, these choices reshape the mind itself. Most people underestimate how deeply daily habits affect emotional health. Small habits repeated consistently become identity. A person who practices gratitude daily slowly becomes more peaceful naturally. A person constantly feeding resentment daily becomes more bitter over time. A person practicing awareness daily slowly becomes more emotionally balanced. Your daily actions shape your mental world more than temporary emotions ever will. This is why Buddhism emphasizes mindfulness in ordinary moments. Peace is not only practiced during meditation, it is practiced while eating, walking, breathing, listening, speaking, and living. Every moment becomes an opportunity to train awareness. When eating, fully taste the food instead of scrolling endlessly. When walking, notice your breathing instead of drowning in thought. When speaking to others, truly listen instead of mentally preparing responses constantly. When emotions arise, observe them before reacting impulsively. These small practices reconnect consciousness to the present moment again and again. Over time, life itself begins feeling calmer. This is because mindfulness slowly removes the mind's addiction to unconscious chaos. Many people live almost entirely on autopilot. They wake up already stressed, their thoughts run automatically, their emotional reactions happen instantly, they consume endless stimulation without awareness, then eventually burnout appears because the nervous system never truly rests. Buddhism teaches that awareness interrupts this unconscious cycle. A peaceful mind is not empty because nothing difficult ever happens. It is peaceful because awareness creates space between experience and reaction. This space changes everything. Without awareness, anger instantly controls behavior. Fear instantly controls decisions. Sadness instantly controls identity. But awareness creates choice. You begin responding consciously instead of reacting automatically. This is real emotional freedom. Daily peace also requires protecting your energy carefully. Many people unknowingly destroy their mental peace through constant emotional overstimulation. Too much noise, too much comparison, too much negativity, too many draining people, too much information. The mind becomes exhausted because it never receives silence long enough to recover. Buddhism teaches balance. You do not need to escape the world completely, but you must create moments where the nervous system can finally breathe again. Silence heals because it allows awareness to return. Nature heals because it reconnects the mind with stillness. Simplicity heals because it removes unnecessary pressure from consciousness. This is why peaceful people often move differently through life. They slow down, they become more intentional, they protect their inner world carefully. They no longer chase endless stimulation constantly, and because of this, their mind gradually becomes calmer. Another important truth Buddhism teaches is that peace requires letting go repeatedly. Many people believe healing means reaching a permanent state where negative thoughts never appear again, but the mind naturally continues producing thoughts and emotions throughout life. Peace comes from learning how to release them instead of clinging to them endlessly. Some days you must let go of fear again. Some days you must let go of anger again. Some days you must let go of painful memories again. This is part of the practice. Peace is not a destination you arrive at once forever. It is something renewed daily through awareness. The beautiful part is that the more you practice, the more natural peace begins feeling. At first, mindfulness requires effort, because the mind is deeply conditioned toward distraction and overthinking, but eventually awareness becomes stronger than unconscious habits. Calmness begins appearing more automatically. Silence feels comforting instead of uncomfortable. Emotional reactions soften naturally. Your relationship with suffering changes completely. You stop panicking every time difficult emotions arise. You stop believing every negative thought immediately. You stop letting temporary mental storms define your identity. Instead, you become grounded, present, aware, peaceful. This transformation often happens so gradually that you barely notice it in the beginning. Then one day something difficult happens, and you realize your mind responded differently than before. The situation that once would have emotionally destroyed you now feels manageable. The fear that once consumed your entire night loses power more quickly. The overthinking weakens sooner, and suddenly you realize the mind has changed, not because life became easier, but because daily practice slowly rebuilt your inner world. Buddhism teaches that every thought, every habit, every moment of awareness plants seeds inside consciousness. The seeds you water daily eventually become your emotional reality. If you constantly water fear, suffering grows stronger. If you constantly water awareness, compassion, stillness, and mindfulness, peace slowly blossoms instead. This is why daily practice matters more than temporary motivation. One calm breath matters. One mindful moment matters. One moment of awareness matters. One decision not to feed negativity matters. These small moments seem insignificant individually, but repeated over months and years, they transform the entire mind. Most people are searching for one giant breakthrough while ignoring the small daily habits creating their suffering continuously. But Buddhism teaches that your life is shaped by repeated patterns far more than dramatic moments. A peaceful life is built quietly, through ordinary choices, ordinary awareness, ordinary discipline, repeated consistently, and eventually the mind that once felt like a prison becomes calmer, softer, lighter, and more peaceful than you ever imagined possible. Not because you escaped life, not because suffering never appeared again, but because you finally trained your mind to stop creating unnecessary suffering every single day. That is the true path to peace, not perfection, practice. Your mind is like a garden. Whatever you water daily will eventually grow. If you continue feeding fear, overthinking, anger, and negativity, suffering will keep controlling your life. But if you begin feeding awareness, silence, peace, and mindfulness, your entire inner world slowly changes. Buddhism teaches that peace is not something you find somewhere outside yourself. It is something you build quietly within your own mind every single day. So from this moment forward, watch your thoughts carefully, protect your energy deeply, and remember, the mind that once destroyed your peace can also become the reason you finally heal.